When we talk about spotting demons in friends and family, the first thing we have to understand is that these demons rarely appear in dramatic, cinematic forms. They don't arrive in cloaks or with horns. More often, they emerge in the quiet erosion of your confidence, in the subtle ways someone's behavior chips away at your sense of self over time. Recognizing these patterns requires a patient, almost forensic eye and the courage to face uncomfortable truths about people you care for deeply. The most important thing to realize is that toxic behavior is usually consistent, not situational. One argument, one bad day, or one sharp remark does not make someone a demon, but patterns, persistent behaviors that leave you feeling diminished, anxious, or constantly on edge. These are the red flags. We tend to dismiss small transgressions when they come from those we love. After all, family is family and friends are friends. But over weeks, months, or even years, the cumulative effect of repeated criticism, passive aggression, or dismissive remarks can quietly warp your emotional landscape. This is where awareness must step in. Psychologically, what we're observing is a kind of behavioral contagion. When someone consistently engages in negativity, manipulation, or control, it doesn't just affect their actions, it affects the emotional rhythm of those around them. You might notice yourself second-guessing your decisions, doubting your judgment, or feeling guilty for things you haven't done. These are the signals your mind is sending you, the internal alarms that something is wrong. Ignoring them is easy, especially because love and loyalty often cloud our perception. But wisdom demands that we pay attention to these alarms, that we map the patterns with precision rather than letting emotions alone guide our judgments. Philosophically, this also touches on the age-old question of moral responsibility and human nature. We like to think of demons as external entities, but more often the demon is a person's choices, the decisions they make every day to manipulate, control, or undermine. It is not necessarily malevolence in a supernatural sense. It is the repeated neglect or abuse of moral and emotional responsibility. And what makes it particularly insidious is the way it hides behind familiarity. The closer someone is to you, the harder it is to see clearly. Your affection can blind you to the pattern until it becomes undeniable. Recognizing it then is not about cynicism, it's about clarity. It's about separating who they are from the roles they play in your life and understanding the consequences of their repeated actions. To be clear, spotting these patterns is not a call to judgment for the sake of condemnation. It is an act of self-preservation. It is a commitment to your own mental and emotional well-being. It means noticing the subtle ways someone's behavior consistently drains your energy or diminishes your confidence. It means acknowledging that a toxic pattern is real, even when it involves people who have been part of your life for decades. And it means preparing yourself to act, not in anger or revenge, but with deliberate wisdom to confront, to set boundaries, or, when necessary, to distance yourself. The first step in identifying these demons is therefore observation. Look for consistency in behavior, attention to recurring patterns of criticism or dismissal, and awareness of how you feel after interactions. Pay attention to your own inner responses. They are often the most accurate barometer. And above all, trust yourself. Your mind and heart are equipped to sense what is safe and what is corrosive. In the end, recognizing these patterns is not an act of suspicion. It is an act of courage. It is the choice to see clearly, to understand deeply, and to act wisely, because the greatest betrayal is not from someone else. It is from ignoring the truths your own perception has already revealed. Do not wait until the erosion becomes irreversible. Watch, reflect, and act. The demons of the heart, once identified, lose their power, but only if you have the courage to recognize them first. Once we have begun to recognize the patterns that signal toxicity in those closest to us, the next crucial step is understanding the dynamics of emotional manipulation and control. This is where the behavior moves beyond being merely draining and enters the realm of actively shaping your perception, your choices, and even your sense of reality. Emotional manipulation is subtle, almost surgical in its precision, and it thrives on the intimacy of the relationship. It does not need to be overt. Its power lies in its quiet, persistent influence. Psychologically, manipulation works because it exploits trust, affection, and familiarity. Someone who wishes to control you knows the buttons to push, the insecurities to exploit, and the patterns of your thinking to redirect. It often begins with small gestures, a comment that makes you question your judgment, a compliment that feels conditional, a withdrawal that elicits guilt. Alone, these actions may appear benign. Taken together over time, they constitute a system designed to keep you off balance, questioning your own perceptions, and increasingly dependent on the manipulator for validation. One of the most insidious forms of this manipulation is gaslighting, a process in which someone systematically causes you to doubt your memory, your perception, even your sanity. It is a quiet theft of self-trust. You begin to question your instincts, thinking perhaps you are overreacting or imagining problems where none exist. Yet the repeated cycles of control and subtle coercion reveal a pattern, and it is in recognizing that pattern that we find the key to liberation. Awareness, in this context, is the antidote to deception. Philosophically, this brings us face to face with the question of moral responsibility. The manipulator often presents themselves as misunderstood, as acting in your best interest, or as a victim of circumstance. And in a sense, this is precisely why these patterns are so dangerous. They are wrapped in plausibility and cloaked in the rhetoric of care. But ethical responsibility demands clarity. Every action has consequences, and repeated manipulation is a deliberate choice, not an accident. Recognizing this choice allows us to separate the person from their behavior without denying the reality of harm. It allows us to see the structure of control for what it is, rather than letting emotion obscure judgment. The practical manifestation of emotional control can take many forms: guilt tripping to achieve compliance, subtle threats to maintain dominance, constant comparison to others to undermine self-esteem, or relentless criticism disguised as guidance. The common thread is always the same: the diminishment of your autonomy and the elevation of the manipulator's power. To survive this and to act wisely, we must cultivate self-awareness. We must learn to notice the recurring cycles of offense, apology, and repetition. The apology is often sincere, or at least convincing, but it is also a mechanism to reset the cycle, to lull you back into trust before the pattern begins again. Acting with wisdom does not mean confrontation in anger, nor does it mean blind forgiveness. It means understanding the mechanisms at play, acknowledging the impact they have on your mind and your life, and reclaiming your agency. Boundaries are not punitive. They are protective. They are a declaration that your emotional space, your integrity, and your self-respect are not negotiable. Ultimately, recognizing emotional manipulation is about reclaiming authority over your own perception and choices. It is about saying with clarity and conviction that no one has the right to redefine your reality or compromise your autonomy. The first step is awareness. The second is understanding, and the final step is decisive action. In ignoring manipulation, we become complicit in our own diminishment. In confronting it with insight and resolve, we reclaim the power that is rightly ours. Do not mistake subtlety for harmlessness. The quiet erosion of your autonomy is a form of betrayal, and the most courageous act is to see it clearly and respond with wisdom. The moment you recognize the patterns of manipulation, you have already taken the first step toward liberation. Guard your mind, trust your instincts, and act with deliberate clarity. The demons who seek to control you lose all power when you refuse to participate in their game. Even after we recognize patterns of toxicity and manipulation, there remains a layer that is often the most difficult to confront: the hidden agendas and betrayals that quietly shape the relationships we trust most. These are the acts that undermine the very foundation of loyalty, sometimes so subtly that they feel almost accidental. And yet, when viewed with attention and honesty, they reveal themselves as deliberate choices, actions that prioritize self-interest, control, or personal gain over the well-being of those closest to us. Betrayal in the context of friends and family is particularly corrosive because it exploits the deepest human assumption that those we love will act, at least in part, with our interests in mind. We want to believe in trust, in loyalty, in the implicit contract of care that binds intimate relationships. But hidden agendas violate this contract in ways that are not always dramatic or visible. They often manifest in subtle undermining, covert criticism shared with others, sabotage disguised as concern, or withholding of support at crucial moments. The effect is cumulative, leaving us disoriented, questioning our own judgment, and often feeling isolated, even within the familiarity of those we call family. Psychologically, these betrayals operate on two levels. On one hand, they distort our perception of reality, making it difficult to see the full scope of harm or intention. On the other, they create internal conflict as our emotions struggle to reconcile affection with evidence of harm. This tension is exhausting. It leaves us emotionally drained and unsure whether we are overreacting, imagining the threat, or simply too sensitive. It is precisely in this space of doubt that hidden agendas flourish, because self-doubt makes us hesitant to confront or challenge the behavior. Philosophically, this raises questions about morality and intentionality. When someone acts in ways that subtly betray trust, they are making an active decision to place their priorities above the ethical and relational obligations that tie us together. It is a reminder that the capacity for harm is not always obvious, nor is it always malicious in the dramatic sense. Sometimes it is the quiet, persistent choice to manipulate, to mislead, or to benefit at another's expense that constitutes the deepest form of betrayal. Understanding this allows us to see relationships not as static bonds, but as ongoing negotiations of integrity, responsibility, and respect. Recognizing hidden agendas requires both attentiveness and courage. It requires noticing when patterns emerge, when favors are conditional, when support is selective, or when advice consistently serves the other person's interests more than your own. It requires listening not only to what is said, but to what is omitted, and paying attention to recurring situations where you feel undermined, minimized, or deceived. Trusting your instincts in these moments is crucial. Intuition is often the first line of defense against subtle betrayal. Acting wisely in response to these realizations does not mean abandoning compassion or severing ties immediately. It means creating a framework for discernment, questioning motives, observing patterns, and protecting yourself from repeated harm. It means addressing issues directly when possible, setting boundaries that are firm but fair, and accepting that some relationships may never align with the ethical standards you hold. Liberation comes not from punishing the betrayer, but from reclaiming clarity, autonomy, and peace of mind. The truth is that hidden agendas, when left unchecked, erode our sense of trust and warp our perception of human connection. But when we see them clearly, we gain an extraordinary advantage, the ability to act with foresight, to prioritize integrity, and to refuse participation in subtle forms of harm. The act of seeing and acknowledging these betrayals is itself a form of resistance, a conscious choice to protect your inner life and your emotional sovereignty. Do not underestimate the danger of hidden agendas. The quiet undermining of trust is a form of violence to the psyche, subtle but real, and the most courageous act is to observe it clearly and respond with wisdom. Recognize the patterns, honor your instincts, and reclaim your agency. In doing so, you transform the power these hidden betrayals might hold over you into a catalyst for vigilance, discernment, and self-preservation. By the time we reach the question of setting boundaries and protecting ourselves, we have already observed patterns of toxicity, recognized emotional manipulation, and confronted the reality of hidden agendas and betrayal. All of this points to a single, undeniable truth. Awareness alone is not enough. Recognition without action leaves us exposed, perpetually at the mercy of the same behaviors we have come to understand. Protecting ourselves, therefore, is not an act of selfishness. It is an act of survival and clarity. It is the conscious assertion that our mental and emotional integrity is non-negotiable. Setting boundaries begins with understanding that no one has the right to erode your sense of self, regardless of familial ties or long-standing friendships. Boundaries are not punitive. They are declarative. They communicate what you will accept, what you will no longer tolerate, and what you require to maintain your own equilibrium. Psychologically, boundaries serve as a form of self-regulation. They define the limits of what is healthy, safe, and sustainable for your mind and your life. They are a protective framework, a way of mapping the terrain between connection and autonomy. Philosophically, boundaries are a statement of moral responsibility to yourself and to others. They articulate the principle that relationships are reciprocal, not exploitative. When someone repeatedly drains your energy, manipulates your perception, or betrays your trust, the ethical response is not passive endurance, but thoughtful resistance. To act without boundaries is to participate in your own diminishment. To act with boundaries is to assert the dignity of your existence and the primacy of your consciousness. It is a moral stance, not just an emotional one. Practically, setting boundaries can take many forms. It may be limiting the time spent with someone whose presence consistently leaves you drained. It may involve refusing to engage in conversations that are manipulative or hostile. It may even mean severing contact, temporarily or permanently, with individuals whose behaviors are irredeemably harmful. Each boundary is an exercise in clarity, a conscious decision to prioritize your mental health, emotional well-being, and personal integrity. These actions are not acts of vengeance. They are acts of preservation, a refusal to participate in cycles of harm. The challenge, of course, lies in the emotional weight of doing so. Family ties, lifelong friendships, and deep attachments create a gravitational pull that makes boundaries difficult to maintain. Guilt, obligation, and societal expectations often whisper that loyalty requires endurance, that love requires tolerance. But there is a critical distinction between loyalty to a person and loyalty to your own principles. The former without the latter is self-erasure. Protecting yourself is not betrayal. It is recognition of the fact that no relationship is worth sacrificing your inner stability. In reclaiming your space, you create room for relationships that are genuine, reciprocal, and nourishing. You model for others what integrity looks like in action. You communicate clearly that manipulation, toxicity, and betrayal cannot coexist with respect, trust, or healthy intimacy. Boundaries are, in this sense, both defensive and aspirational. They shield you from harm while inviting the possibility of authentic connection. Ultimately, the act of protecting yourself is a culmination of all the insights we have explored. It is the point at which awareness, understanding, and discernment intersect with deliberate action. It is the conscious refusal to let patterns of toxicity define your life. By observing behaviors, recognizing manipulation, acknowledging hidden agendas, and establishing firm boundaries, you reclaim the agency that is always your birthright. Do not underestimate the transformative power of this act. To set boundaries is to assert that your mind, your emotions, and your soul are not negotiable. It is a courageous affirmation that you will not participate in cycles of harm. And it is a statement that the demons we encounter, whether in friends or family, lose their power when we refuse to grant it. Protect yourself, act with clarity, and let your boundaries be the shield that preserves not only your peace, but your freedom to live fully and authentically.